Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT, Firefly Recovery, and Engage Movement. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. For more on ISOFIT, be sure to check out ISOFIT. Firefly Recovery is the official recovery provider of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. For more on Firefly, be sure to check out recoveryfirefly.com. This episode is also powered by Dr. Ray Gorman, the founder of Engage Movement. Learn how to boost your income without relying on sessions and get a free training on the blended practice model by following Ray Gorman DPT on Instagram. Enjoy. Nina, welcome to the podcast. Huge shout out to our friend Cara for getting us connected that way. For people who aren't familiar with you and all the amazing stuff you're doing in the sports world, currently over in the UK, actually, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all the amazing things you have going on?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Nina. I am a strength and conditioning coach and a former / sort of current Olympic weightlifter with British Weightlifting. So currently got going on, I am an intern S&C, assistant S&C for the women's US national rugby team. So we are just about to kick off the Rugby World Cup, and so the team are over in England. So I joined them for their first English camp at Loughborough University, where I study my master's out of. And then we have been on the road. We're now up in Newcastle. We'll be here for the group stages of the World Cup. So we've got 3 games. Our first game's against England, and it will be the most tickets ever sold to a women's rugby game in history. It's the very first game. Yeah, so it's sold over 40,000 tickets of the game. Which for the US, I think, is the maybe even England as well, is the highest number of tickets ever sold in the history of the game. So
yeah, that's incredible. We love that. I love to see the sport of rugby grow and develop that way. I mean, it's so exciting to watch. I'm a little curious. How did you end up surrounding yourself with the sport of rugby when you have what sounds like a bit more of a Olympic weightlifting background?
Yeah, so like I said, I go to Loughborough University, and if you know anything about Loughborough, it's the top sport uni in the world. One thing they're very proud of is their rugby setup. So in English rugby, for the women's side, it's the best pathway for female players is through university, through the Bucks system. And so I just knew a lot of the girls when I was in the gyms, weightlifting. A few of them wanted to get into weightlifting, a few of the guys did. Kind of became just good friends with a few of them and their coaches. And then I started to notice the game, and this was during the time I was developing my passion for strength and conditioning. And I've just got fascinated by the development of the game from a physiological standpoint, just how the game is only in the last 5 years really skyrocketed. And because of that, the female anatomy and physiology required to play the game at an elite level has sort of gone up and down with finding its rhythm the way the men's has for the last 20, 30 years. So to be a part of that and to be exposed to it and be around it from such a high level female environment, because Loughborough has a PWR club, like Premiership Rugby. So like in that top league, Loughborough University host a club called Loughborough Lightning, which is the top level club in that league. So being so closely exposed to a few of the girls on the team and the coaching staff, it kind of got me interested in the sport. And I had the opportunity to coach the sevens team at their Bucks tournament. So rugby sevens is what's in the Olympics. And they do it day tournament style. Instead of one game every couple of weeks, they do 3 to 4 games in a day. And so they took me on as their S&C coach for their tournament for the championship, and we ended up winning. And to my surprise, very gratefully, we didn't get a single injury, which is quite rare for a sevens tournament, given the amount of contact they go through and the fact that it was in a heat wave. So I got a lot of praise for getting them through without an injury. And that sort of just sparked my interest in the sport and how weightlifting can also influence the sport. And so just through my connections, being at Loughborough and being connected with clubs like Aston Villa Football Club, I was working with the NFL Academy at the time, with British Weightlifting as well. The Leicester Tigers head coach reached out to me and offered me an opportunity to come work with their women's team. So I took that up. I've been with them for the preseason. And then one of them had a connection in USA and reached out to USA. It was like, do you guys need an S&C coach when you come England side for the World Cup? And they were like, actually, yeah, our head S&C, he's absolutely swamped. If you had someone that can intern with us and just pick up a bit of the slack, that would be great. So they put me forward, and here I am.
It sounds like the networking element has really paid dividends to you. My goodness, you mentioned so many different clubs. It sounds like you kind of know almost everyone in the UK by the sounds.
Yeah, the industry is built on networking because it's such a small industry in itself. Strength and conditioning is not very well known as a job almost. It's a lot more developed in America. It's kind of where it comes from, but it's such an important role. Like if you're going to be an athlete, you're going to need to get into a gym. So a lot of strength and conditioning coaches go under physical performance coaches as well, because our job is to get you to perform physically at your best. Then the rugby coach, for example, needs to perfect your rugby skills, but we just need to make sure that you're fit enough to do that. And it's the foundation to most sports. So it's just a fascinating, like under the cover little world that's sort of coming to light now.
Absolutely. No, that's amazing. And I'm just thinking back to your background a bit. Aren't you originally from the BVIs that way? So UK is kind of, obviously affiliated with the BVIs, but kind of a new and very different landscape than the BVIs that way.
Yeah, massively. Yeah. So I grew up in British Virgin Islands, and which is over in the West Indies, and I only moved to England for university. So I flew out a week before my undergraduate started. That was my first time properly in England, and ever since then I kind of just took a crack at it, enjoyed it. The country's a funny place, very cold, very rainy, very different from home, but I had a passion for sport. Loughborough had the best weightlifting team in the country as well, so I kind of fit into that and found a like-minded people. Weightlifting is a very introverted, sort of isolated sport, so the people that do it tend to gel really well because you have to be slightly crazy to do it. And kind of just found a little home away from home and developed from there.
What initially got you into the sport of weightlifting? Because normally when I'm talking with athletes, they're talking about, field hockey or lacrosse or rugby or any one of these other team-based sports that way. Not many fall into that Olympic weightlifting category. And it's so comical to me how some people didn't even realize they could compete in Olympic weightlifting. And they're like, oh yeah, that's like clean and jerk. I do that, or clean variations as prep for my sport. And they don't realize that it's actually a sport standalone within itself that way. How did you end up falling into the Olympic weightlifting space?
Yeah, so I've always found it quite funny given my sporting background. So if we go back 10, 15 years, I was in football, surfing, sailing. I played a little bit of tag rugby because that's what they put us through in school. And I always got bored. I got really fixated. I was always quite good at sports, especially for a girl in the Caribbean. It's not really pushed on girls to excel at sports. But tennis, I was quite good at for my age. Football, they got me to play for the national team when I was really young. I was a goalie. And then someone opened a CrossFit gym on my island, and I tried a session and just kind of loved it and was really hooked on it. And I got into CrossFit, and just the idea that I could get better at everything and all these different areas. And I got really good at rowing and running, gymnastic skills, and weightlifting was a big part of that. Fast forward 6 or so years, and then really started to develop a fixation in weightlifting and just the perfectionism behind it, which if you look at my background, I always got bored in a sport, even when I fixated on it. So coming to weightlifting, I never really got bored of it. I enjoyed the routine of it and the perfectionist aspect of the sport. As much as it is about lifting a very heavy weight, it's about doing it efficiently. And for me, that just fascinated me. And with my development and I guess you could say repetition of doing these lifts over and over and over again, my neurological understanding of the sport just increased and kept increasing. So the awareness of where my body is in space became super heightened. And so I found that, especially then going into S&C, I found that super fascinating to translate into other sports. So I'd go try rugby and use the same technique I'd use in a clean, but in a tackle to tackle somebody. And despite not having any rugby muscle necessarily, I was still able to produce these strong tackles just simply because I was using the same efficiency of the sport that I grew up in. So yeah, it's just through that weightlifting kind of became a sport that was routine to me and I could excel at and meet like-minded people in and then compete at.
And on top of that, I'm just thinking about the demands of Olympic weightlifting. It really combines everything you might need. You need to have exceptional mobility in order to compete in Olympic weightlifting. I just think about the squat depth to the overhead positions and how much my own overhead squat mobility sucks. And I look at what you all do, and then on top of that, keeping the weight overhead strong and stable throughout that entire process is beyond me how y'all do it. It's wicked impressive. It combines that mobility element with a unbelievable strength element, and then it factors in this power element as well, because thinking about some of these different triple extension type patterns like clean variations, for example, it's like you are extremely powerful and extremely explosive during those. And as you mentioned as well, there's certainly a strong technique element to it. And I think about the clean in particular and just how many individuals will try and just kind of like brute force muscle the clean up to their shoulders to get that front rack position. And I'm probably a bit guilty of that as well, in the sense that we might not have great bar drive off of our hips in order to kind of like maximize our momentum and get the weight up there in a more efficient means that way. So it's certainly a unique sport that blends so many different elements together that could, in theory, lay the foundation for success in a wide array of other sports. And I think that's why so many different strength coaches that I've seen and worked with have pushed some of these Olympic variations so strongly for their own athletes' performances. They recognize that, yes, there's a lot of prep work and there's a lot of groundwork to lay a good foundation with these lifts, but if you do it correctly, the juice is probably worth the squeeze for many of them.
Yeah, like you say, it's what I love so much about the sport is the fact that it is so fundamental in the basis of most sports. So like most athletes you'll see will do a clean element in the gym, especially in America. It's such an American fundamental is weightlifting, which I love, and I always try to implement it into sports I work in because of just the pure like adaptability of it, and you can put it anywhere, and it requires mobility. So unlike a sport like powerlifting, which we get similarly related to, which couldn't be further from weightlifting, is that you can bench 300-400 pounds or kilos or whatever, and you'll end up with shoulders like this and not being able to extend your back, but you don't need to. Whereas in weightlifting, if you can't lock out properly overhead, then there's no point in competing in it. Like I've got one of my rugby players, she can front squat 160 kilos and she weighs maybe 85 kilos, which if you look at for a woman, that's almost a double body weight front squat, which is insane. But you ask her to squat that over her head, she can barely do an empty bar. So for me, I just find that a fascinating skill element. And that's just, part of why I love the sport.
Absolutely, absolutely. Earlier, you mentioned that growing up in the BVIs, sports were not necessarily something that was deemed essential and really promoted for females on the island that way. And it's interesting because even just talking with Cara, I've learned that life on the island is certainly different than what most people might think of in places like America, for example, that way. I'd love to hear more kind of about your kind of take on female sports in some of those different regions, like growing up in the BVIs, like in the islands and some of these other kind of more remote places that way, because it certainly seems like in some areas of the world, female sports are being promoted heavily and very much on the rise, but in other areas, it seems like female sports are still kind of a little bit behind, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I want to make it very clear that the school I went to and the environment I was brought up in was very supportive of female athletes. Like there was no one saying I couldn't because I was a girl, but there was just a lack of female representation, especially like on the island. It's still very much a culture of women shouldn't be strong, women shouldn't have muscles, it doesn't look right, therefore they shouldn't do these sports. And I always got a lot of that growing up, but didn't bother me. I was going to do it anyway because I enjoyed it. But yeah, so just from a school perspective, like I said, I was in quite a few sports growing up. Like we always had a football team and a basketball team, but the demographic of girls doing that was maybe 1 to 2 girls to a team, and it was always in the men's team. So there was an element of I actually really liked it that way, because what I've noticed moving to England, there's a massive emphasis on girls will play netball, boys will do basketball, and you'll go that direction. Same with like hockey tends to be for girls and rugby tends to be for boys, which I find is very segregated, and I don't like that. I quite like the aspect that like the boys do this, but no one says you can't, so go join. And I kind of enjoyed that growing up. So I threw myself into all of these sporting environments. So the island cultures are still very much behind in the sporting, but they don't not support you. They still do. It's just it's not promoted that you should go and do it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you mentioned tennis, obviously Olympic weightlifting. What other kind of sporting background do you have? Because it certainly sounds like you were highly active and just doing a lot of different things that way. I mean, I'm picturing island life possibly involving surfing and some other things on the water as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I started like I was always a very active kid from a young age, 5 to 7. I was swimming loads. We were always surfing on the weekends, sailing. So surfing and sailing were probably the two that we got thrown in earliest, because that was like what they had loads of kids caps in, and it was already like deemed being in the water is already there's a level of safety required. So therefore there's always supervision. So there's always camps around it. So it was always surfing and sailing, because then mom got to go to the beach. So why not chuck the kids in the water with an instructor, babysitting sorted. So I was always doing that. And then the one thing I found with sailing, which I never really enjoyed, was the fact that when you learn how to sail in the BVI, it was because you were learning how to race. And I didn't want to race in sailing. I wanted to just enjoy it. So every time I got put in the boat, it was to compete in a regatta or to compete in a little island competition, get taught how to race fast. I actually didn't want to do that. So I sort of bounced around those. Football is what we played at school. And yeah, the women's team, the school didn't have one, but I became a goalie and I became quite well known for being a fairly good goalkeeper. So the BVI national team picked me up. And I think I was 13, 14. I played for their under 21s team, but I just didn't enjoy it. The setup wasn't great. Getting to training was a bit of faff because it was always on the weekends when I wanted to play and be a kid. So the seriousness of it was quite difficult to take on at a young age. And tennis, my mum was a tennis player. She loved tennis. So we got thrown into that, had a great tennis coach. But again, I just kind of lost the love for it after a while. I was a fat kid. Like I was just, at heart, I eat and sit around and do nothing. And if I don't do sports, I will just get fat. When I stopped playing tennis, stopped playing football, I kind of just got a bit lazy. Didn't really fancy competing in surfing. My brother did, and he enjoyed it, but there's not enough motivation in it. There's not enough professionalism around the sports to kind of want to keep you going. But I found CrossFit, and that sort of took over. I competed a little bit in CrossFit, and then when I moved to England, British weightlifting was about the hub, and British GB's team ran out of Loughborough. So to train amongst people that were winning Commonwealth gold medals and going to the Olympics and World Championships, and to just be in that environment, that's what pushed me then to want to, okay, I can compete in this. I can be around this professionalism. Makes me want to get better as an athlete. And it was one of the very few sports where men and women, there was an equal level of respect and discipline and equality in training. Like men trained with women, it didn't really matter. The same level of discipline was given across both sports. If the girls were clean and jerking 200 kilos and the guys were clean and jerking 400 kilos, it was still very much, that's impressive and that's impressive. And I really like that element of the sport where you get rarely ever had people going, oh, it's girls lifting, it's not that much. Like, it was a very equally understood impressiveness, I guess you could call it. And I really like that.
Absolutely. No, that mutual respect element is huge. And to your point, that's something that I just watch some of these athletes doing these different things. I'm just like captivated by it. It's like y'all just snatched that much weight overhead with perfect form. And meanwhile, I'm over here just trying to get comfortable through the snatch motion because it's wicked uncomfortable. And even for a while, I was doing a little bit of strongman training with a few friends of mine, Greg, Jeff, shout out to those guys real quick. And I was amazed at what they were capable of doing, but also amazed at how uncomfortable it is in the moment. There's certain sporting elements that are just generally uncomfortable that I think are widely acknowledged and accepted, right? So take your conditioning sessions within some of these different field sports. I think people know that they're going to be a little short of breath, that they're going to be working hard, but then you factor in some of these different strongman or Olympic lifting type of disciplines that way. And I think there's, in my opinion, a little bit carryover more so between Olympic lifting and strongman than powerlifting and Olympic lifting, because a lot of the strongman events involve clean and press and some of these other Olympic variations. They're just done with various implements, such as like an axle bar, for example, that way. I think there's some small linkage that exists there. And it's just insane to me how uncomfortable some of these positions were, or what it actually felt like to tense and brace everything that I had in order to stabilize in these positions. And I was just kind of like, man, like this is a different level of hard, but I can certainly see how something to that effect would be addicting because it's unique, it stands out, and there's something about that suck that comes with training that is just addicting to people. I think about even something like jujitsu. It's like, you know, some people after they roll jujitsu feel awful. They kind of just got beat up and thrown around, but they're addicted to the sport regardless. So I think the same is true with Olympic weightlifting. With that in mind, is there's something just addicting in nature about it that maybe can't necessarily be put into words. And I think the other piece that you mentioned as well, at least in relation to your own background, is your wide array of sporting backgrounds. I think a lot of times people get so caught up in one sport from a young age. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely producing highly skilled athletes. But if you commit yourself to that one thing and maybe you face some of those different things, kind of like you mentioned, whether that's burnout or just not wanting to continue within that sporting discipline long term, now what? Right? There's plenty of opportunities out there. You've just got to be willing to find them and try different things. And I certainly am still a little bit biased towards the athlete that has a very wide movement vocabulary, that's grown up doing a little bit of everything, whether that's sailing, surfing, rowing, football, tennis, Olympic lifting, whatever it is that way. I certainly see a ton of benefit for the athletes who have a really wide movement vocabulary, who have tried a ton of different sports. Maybe instead of just being an inch wide and mile deep on one thing, maybe they're an inch deep and a mile wide in millions of different things. And I think there's just tremendous value to that. And I also think, just going on a little bit of a tangent here, you mentioned about your love for food. And I think that's probably one of the many reasons why you and I get along so well. The amount of times I've shared on episodes that I always bring the big back energy. And anytime I go on a little bit of a trip, I'm searching for like the best foods and that sort of thing. It certainly makes the training more worthwhile to me, knowing that I'm fueling adequately, or sometimes maybe a little too adequately, for what that training is going to entail.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I love what I do because it's becoming more common to come from a diverse background and not specialize. And one thing, I just going into it quickly, when I was at Aston Villa Football Club, I worked there as an S&C coach in the women's side through their academy. And they made it a key point from the S&C point of view to implement multi-sport into their warm-ups. Because, like, if you know anything about S&C, the one thing is warm-ups are key. Like, that's one thing we strive for, is how do we create change in the warm-ups to develop an athlete long term. And one thing they were massive on was implement a form of multi-sport, because it helps to prevent burnout, especially in a sport like football, where it's ingrained from such a young age. And these girls will be probably very successful. And a lot of them already play for the England Academy and they're 13 to 16. But if they want a 24, 30-year career in the sport, that's a long time being very elite at one thing. So we always implement games of handball, netball, rugby, capture the flag, whatever it is, just to keep an element of multisport, because it is so important in athlete development to maintain a level of balance in a world where balance just doesn't exist. So I find that absolutely fascinating. And as an S&C coach that comes from such a diverse background, the importance to not tie your identity to one sport is so high, because when I got injured and blew my knee out, I lost my identity because I couldn't weightlift. So I found an outlet in coaching weightlifting, which was still tethering to an identity. So I made sure to keep things in my life that I enjoy. One of those things is food. And I love to eat. I'm never going to stop eating. And I'm always going to train to outwork the amount of food I take in, because I won't restrict myself unless I'm competing. So yeah, I always try to make sure that athletes I work with understand that their whole life doesn't have to be lifting a bar up and down or kicking a ball across the field. Like, keep outlets in your life. If you enjoy playing music, learn an instrument, keep it with you, because inevitably you get injured. Like, there are very few athletes I know that haven't been injured. If it's 2 weeks or if it's 6 months, you need to find outlets and maintaining a life outside of your sport. And that's why I do love the diverse background of at least my background. And when I have an athlete, try to force them to in your free time, don't go kick a rugby ball 50 times. Go try tennis if you want to do something new. Go rock climbing. Just use your physicality, which you've built so beautifully, and go funnel that into other elements just to maintain fun in your sport, which I think is so important.
Before we get into your knee injury, building on that concept of training multiple sport disciplines and mixing it up and having a little bit of a wider movement vocabulary, if you will, I can imagine highly competitive athletes push back on that a little bit, because they've been taught, hey, you have to practice your sport over and over again to get better at it. And when they maybe start doing a new sporting discipline, even if it's part of their training, I can imagine the skill set, some carries over, but some probably doesn't. And some of your higher competitors are probably not taking too kindly to this concept of being not good at something, even though it's going to benefit them for the thing that they care about, their main thing at the end of the day. The concept of not being as good at a sport for a period of time probably won't sit right with some of them that way. Is that something that you've ever seen that way from the athletes that you've worked with, or maybe even experienced yourself as an athlete? Maybe you get given some kind of new drill or corrective or whatever the trendy term is for Olympic weightlifting, and you're just like, why the heck am I doing this? Molly Benetti said it best on the podcast in relation to basketball. Hoopers just want to hoop, right? They don't care what their bench press is. They just want to go out there and hit threes and dunk a basketball, right? So have you ever seen anything like that in your athletes, or experienced anything like that yourself in relation to exposing them to different sports and movement, the bands and capacities?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a massive point. If you're going to be an elite level athlete, you're going to be very passionate about what you do, and you're going to be biased towards your passion. And I'm guilty of that with weightlifting. And I've worked with cyclists who are very much like, I don't need to gym because I'm cycling. So my strength and conditioning, my conditioning is cycling. So why am I doing building strength? And for me, the fundamental key to all of it is building trust. So the athlete needs to trust you, and you need to trust the athlete. And that relationship is key. So with my athletes, I'll always build an element of trust. I'll spend time with them in the gym, or if it's a one-on-one, we'll go for a coffee and talk more about what they do and how they get to where they are. They need to understand they can trust me. So correcting a movement they do in the gym and then understanding and feeding the benefits right away. It's like, okay, Nina knows what she's talking about. And then I use that to sort of why don't we just try this, see how this feels? With Leicester Tigers, I'm currently working with their women's team, and we're looking at implementing weightlifting into their training. And some of them are just like, why? I like my squats. I like my rugby ball. I don't want to do anything else. It's like, well, you want to develop power. Say you want to, in your forwards, you've got your props that lift your second rows in the line out. and they physically need to lift a person over their head and hold them over their head in order to catch a ball. Well, how is that much different from a push press? So if you get the athletes to understand how what you're doing benefits them in the sport that they're doing and see a direct translation, that's when they create how you create buy-in, and they will get more engaged with you and give it a go. So that's exactly what I did. It's like, okay, well, why don't we learn how to clean? Nina, what do I need to learn how to clean? It's like, okay, well, you're scrumming and you're on the back of the scrum and you need to push someone forward. How's that any different than pushing weight up? It's just changing the plane and making it horizontal. So I always try to implement a level of understanding of this. We do this because it's helping a sport in this respect, and developing the why and having the athlete understand the why is the golden ticket to getting them to do whatever it is you want them to do.
This may be a little sidetracked, but you brought it up and I feel like I have to dig into it a little bit more. And I don't really have any kind of research to cite on this, more so just personal experience and different cases that way. But I've noticed, at least to myself and many of the athletes that I work with, that they would rather bench press than overhead press. But their bench press does not seem to carry over, in my experience, to their overhead press strength. But if an athlete is really good at moving weight overhead, they seem to have a pretty significant bench press, or they seem to have a much easier time scaling their bench press if they've attacked the overhead pressing variations first. And it sounds like you've seen similar things based on your experience with the ruggers and so on. That way is that if they get the overhead strength, a lot of the other pieces fall into place. And I personally just think about how weak a lot of these individuals are overhead, even myself that way. Like, I'm amazed at how much more comfortable I am benching a lot of weight than I am holding the same amount of weight up overhead, even just holding it there, not even moving it. So I just certainly think that there's an element of the vertical pressing that just carries over so well to sport, even better than some of these horizontal pressing patterns that we might be biased a little bit towards, and I'm guilty of that myself.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at sort of the fundamentals of how humans in general have developed over the last 50 years, it's hunched over a laptop all day long, bad posture, like internally rotated shoulders. And if you bench press, that benefits bench press because you're isolating more muscles towards that movement, and therefore you're going to bench press more. You're going to want to keep doing it because you enjoy the movement. Whereas overhead press forces you to open your shoulders up, but forces you to build thoracic back, which is that top back, all traps and rhomboids and going to your scapular region. So if you can force an athlete to have to overhead press, they're going to go, well, okay, my back all of a sudden doesn't feel very strong. Let me build that. And it will create a more balanced upper body physiology, which is what you want. And then from that, naturally, your bench press is just going to get better because your delts are moving more efficiently. Your traps are engaging correctly. The lats are developing. And in bench press, one of the biggest, yes, the chest is working, but one of the biggest muscles utilized is the lat. So if you can utilize your lats correctly, your bench is going to improve. So it's just a way of sort of rounding out an athlete. And if you take like a rugby player, that overhead press is so important for those forwards because they are lifting people off the floor. But then they also are physically pushing people away, which is all bench press, if you will. So it's utilizing all of those skills. So we'll have days where we'll do overhead work, behind the neck work, thoracic opening, just to create that range of motion. And then we'll have days where, it's a pump session. You're benching loads, and then you're doing your bicep curls to get a pump, and you look good and you like the way it feels. So there's balance and utilization of all of these skills. And that's probably what you're thinking of in terms of.
Quick break, because if you're a rehab professional sick of burnout, this could be your answer. Engage Movement's blended practice model is a proven system built by Dr. Ray Gorman. a PT who walked away from the 55-hour-a-week grind and built a blended practice model that doubled his income while working less than 25 hours a week, and he didn't have to rely on the traditional way of selling sessions to do so. It's all about blending remote and in-person services, stacking monthly recurring revenue, and building a business that finally supports your life, not the other way around. This model isn't just theory. Real providers, including myself, are creating lives of freedom and flexibility without being tied to their schedule. And as a listener, you get free access to the complete training. DM my name, Dan, to @RayGormanDPT on Instagram and receive your free breakdown on the model.
That overhead pressing does indeed benefit the bench more if you utilize it correctly.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things that I've found, and I've just been writing a book that even discusses this a little bit in relation to nonlinearity, how sometimes small little changes or small little things that we pursue end up yielding the best results, right? I like to say that about 20% of our effort can yield up to 80% of our results. And I certainly think that overhead pressing is one of those buckets that you can pursue that will pay dividends to many other ventures, whether that's on the Olympic weightlifting side, the sports side, or just being like freaking jacked in the gym that way. I think if you get really good overhead, a lot of these other pieces fall into place. And that's something that I think is also true in relation to the knee. I know you mentioned your knee injury, and I literally just did a post this morning about how often pieces and variables are missed in relation to knee rehabs, knee injuries that way, right? So often we look at the knee that's injured and we say, oh, we just need to strengthen that. And we forget about the other leg, or we forget about some of these other muscles that play a key role there. And I think the more holistic we can be in our rehab framework, the better off someone is going to be following one of those injuries. I'd love to hear more about your own knee injury. What happened? How did it happen? And what was that kind of process like after injury?
Yeah, for sure. So my knees genetically are have very shallow knee grooves. So for those who don't know, your kneecap sort of sits in like a little canyon, if you will, a little groove. And my kneecap groove just happens to be a lot shallower than the average person. And I unfortunately found this out the hard way by not even weightlifting. I actually finished my weightlifting session, felt fairly okay. I remember my knees feeling sore after that, and I PB'd my snatch like the week before. So I was like on track, doing really well with weightlifting. The British Open, I think, in like 10 days time. So I was in a cut, looking good, feeling good. Everything was kind of falling into place. And then I went and played dodgeball in one of my gym practicals at uni. And ironically, it was for someone's risk assessment, which just makes me laugh. So I was helping her just determine the risks of playing dodgeball as part of a practical submission. And I threw the ball, but because I have a goalkeeping background, I threw the ball like a goalkeeper. So I planted my left leg forward, locked it out, and then threw the ball over my head. And as I did that, I felt something go. I then collapsed on the floor. I felt like a really dull aching pain on the inside of my left leg. And I looked down and my kneecap's sticking out the far left side of my leg, just as this giant lump on the side, and my knee was completely flat. And then I just started screaming. I fully just freaked out. And the biggest issue with this injury is the fact that it didn't pop straight back in. So normally when you dislocate a knee, it should just pop out and pop back in because nothing tore. I felt nothing tore. So the ligaments around should have pulled the kneecap straight back in. It would have hurt and swelled up, but this just didn't happen with mine. It stayed out. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know how to fix it. So after about 45 minutes of me screaming on the floor, sucking on some sort of pain pen, a physio showed up from Loughborough Physio, and she was very great. She's like, oh, I've seen like 6 of these this week alone. You're not the first to have this happen. Easy fix. So she popped my knee back into place, straightened the leg, kneecap went straight back in, and that's sort of when the pain kicked in. My partner at the time, she managed to get there in time and sort of just holding me. I was just a wreck because I was high off of whatever stuff they were making me inhale at the time. And then they chucked me in the back of a security van and dropped me off at A&E. And they scanned it there and showed that my kneecap was sitting to the left of the knee groove because it was so swollen that it was lifted out of the knee groove position, sort of sitting on the side of my leg. And I was in a locked out knee brace, so there's nothing I could really do about it. Long story short, they sort of sent me home after or about midnight. The injury itself happened around 2 p.m. So about 8 hours in hospitals. A mate picked me up and I slept on her sofa because I couldn't get up any stairs. And from there for about 4 months, I was in the sort of limbo of, have I torn my ACL? Have I torn my meniscus? Is my MCL still intact? Not a clue. It was so swollen that there's nothing I could really do. I just had to wait for the swelling. And because I live in the West Indies, this was actually about 10, 11 days before I was due to fly home, and I couldn't cancel my flight. So I flew home with a very swollen leg on blood thinners and a massive knee brace that I had to sort of tuck in between someone else's chair because it didn't bend, which was a very uncomfortable flight. So flying also makes the swelling worse, and I'll get there, they start me in physio, and there's not much they can really physio. Get back to England, had no activation in my quad at all. I lost all the muscle in my left leg. It was literally skin and bone. The size difference was huge. And they started to test my knee when the swelling went down. They're like, okay, looks like you've torn your ACL. You've got a very lax knee. Your shin is jiggling loads in the test. Looks like possible meniscus tear because I was feeling a lot of pain when they test your meniscus, which, if you know, you shouldn't actually do that often because puts your meniscus in a very vulnerable position. So they tested it a few times and saying I had pain in it and in and around the knee, jiggled the leg, it sounded like a torn ACL. So they just started putting me through ACL rehab while I was waiting on doctors to get back. Finally had an MRI done. They came back and said, are you sure you did something to your knee? Because everything comes back completely clean. And I was like, well, yeah, I definitely did something because my kneecap was out the side of my leg. So clearly something had happened. It's like, okay. So they took another look at it. It's like, yeah, we see loads of damage and patella alta, which is raising up the kneecap, where the kneecap is drawn further up the knee. Damage to the meniscus, bruising to the MCL, and a tear, I think, in the meniscus as well, which healed itself, so they say. But I'm still getting pain today, so clearly it's not all completely fine. But yeah, so that was the sort of start of the injury. I was in a brace then for the next maybe 4 months, and they moved me to a metal brace so I could walk and bend my leg. This is when I started to get into weightlifting coaching and just helping out with the team and coaching, pretty much taking over sessions. And yeah, my right leg then started to hurt loads because I was compensating so much. So the physio for this lasted 6 months or so, sort of built up the muscle on both sides, had loads of pain extending my leg. So then they thought, okay, patella tendonitis, that's probably happening. And so that sort of leads me to now where I'm coaching, but I still can't fully bend my leg properly. Still look a bit weird when I go downstairs because my leg kind of gives way still. Had a physio look at it and test it a couple of weeks ago, and she's like, okay, well, you've done the right things for your quad, so your quad's working fine. I was back weightlifting. I competed in May. All looked fairly normal. My knee then decided to jiggle a bit when I was cutting for my comp in May. And the same sort of thing. My knee would bend, move in slightly, and the kneecap would kind of threaten to leave again. So she then tested my legs, like, okay, you've got no hamstring and no adductor. And that's essentially why you aren't functioning at full capacity, but you're still able to weight lift because I'm a quad dominant weightlifter. So this has then put me in, right, sack off weightlifting for a bit. So for the last 2 months, I haven't touched a barbell. I've been at the gym and I have been in rehab, posterior chain rehab. So all glute, hamstring, adductors, calves, just trying to build that side of the body back. But now that I'm on tour, I don't really have access to a gym and I'm working full time. So I haven't been in the gym. This is just get through the World Cup, post World Cup, back to rehab and hopefully build back a knee in all of that.
I'd imagine that's certainly mentally frustrating for you right now, not having access to all the stuff you normally do. And I mean, what a incredible journey and backstory around the knee itself that way. I'd imagine it was quite frustrating to kind of go through this process of thinking we know what it is and now we don't know what it is. And then on top of that, just this process of a long-standing knee issue and knee pain that way. A lot of times people just want to know what it is, and they just want to know what it takes to get it resolved. And then they just want to do the thing, get it fixed, and go back to normal. They don't really want to have to worry about it and deal with it long term. And they don't want to have to worry about, oh, is it this or is it that? Well, this showed up, that didn't show up, and so on that way. Like, it becomes a bit of a frustrating puzzle. And I feel like you're unfortunately at the middle of it. And as a result, it kind of bars you from doing a lot of the things that you want to do for at least a period of time that way. And I think you having your knowledge and background around S&C definitely helps dramatically over someone who doesn't. But I mean, even with that knowledge, it still creates a very frustrating kind of scenario for someone to walk through, for lack of a better way to put it.
Absolutely. It was the most frustrating thing. It was at first I was told you've torn your ACL. So I cried loads because everyone knows an ACL rehab is just horrendous. Then they told me I tore my meniscus. I was like, okay, cried again because just as annoying, but at least I don't need surgery. And then I get the MRI results. Everything's fine, which was even more frustrating because why am I in so much pain if everything's fine? So having to go through all of those processes, and it be now 2.5 years since I did my knee for the first time. And then for it to sort of re-happen again after 2 years and still competing in weightlifting was really frustrating. And it sort of means like I can't pursue weightlifting as a career because my knees just simply can't take it. I could probably never run normally again. I'm still waiting to hear back through the NHS on a potential surgery. But again, I don't know what that's needed. Trying new rehab techniques and just trying to commit to a rehab program, which I've always struggled because I hate rehab and don't know anyone that enjoys it. It's boring. So yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. And for any athlete that's going through an injury and rehab, listening to this, it gets better. You just have to dedicate everything to it, but it does get better. But it's also, my injury is one of the best things that ever happened to me, because without it, I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't be doing the career that I'm doing. I probably wouldn't know what to do with my life. But because I got forced to take a step back from sport, I didn't want to. I got forced to because my knee literally popped out. I learned to find another avenue in sport, and that was in coaching. And because of that little detour I had to take, I wound up here helping out at a women's Rugby World Cup, which is an insane achievement. So at the age of 24, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that injury. So in many ways, like the worst things that ever happened to us, I sometimes try to flip and see as the best things that ever happened to us to find an outlet out the other side of it, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. That actually comes up quite often on the podcast, people telling me that they're thankful that their injury occurred. And it's something that I still don't wish injury upon anyone. And I don't think anyone wishes injury would occur to them. But it's super empowering, in my opinion, to see individuals walk through these long, grueling rehabs and these different frustrating situations and come out on the other side with a very positive and just overall good attitude about things and about what they just went through that way. But I'm sure that's easier said than done for individuals that maybe are struggling to develop that line of thinking or that kind of mindset in relation to their injury. Any kind of advice that you have for them based on your own experience?
When it happens, like in a year, you're going to laugh about it. Like I laugh about mine. I blew my knee up playing dodgeball. Like it's so sad, but you've got to laugh about it. So you have to understand that like that one thing that happened to you doesn't define who you are. It doesn't define your career, and it doesn't define what your worth is as an athlete and as an individual. Because a lot of the time, especially as an athlete, your worth is dependent on how well your body is performing. Like that's what makes you a good athlete. So if your body isn't performing, all of a sudden you feel like you have no worth. So it's really ingraining into people and into athletes that just because your body is injured doesn't mean it's the end of the road if you still want to go back to what you do. And it shouldn't be the reason that you stop what you do or the lack of identity. You need to just find something else to do in the meantime. Get back into your rehab, learn how to play an instrument. Like, use the time your body has given you by being injured to learn something new. That's what I like. The way I looked at it was, okay, I can't weightlift now. Like, at first, okay, it's the end of the world. I can't weightlift anymore. What's my worth? No one's going to love me. It's the only thing I know how to do really well at. Now I'm not very good at anything. It's like, okay, well, I used to play guitar loads. Maybe I'll just go back and do it. I literally can't leave the sofa of my legs propped up in a brace that doesn't bend. I'm just going to sit here and play the guitar. So I started doing that, and I started to get better at playing guitar, and I kind of enjoyed it. And it made me feel good to get better at something, because as an athlete, you're basically a perfectionist just at one thing. So where can you channel that same emotion? It could be something like crocheting, because you've always wanted to learn how to crochet, or knitting, or playing the oboe. Like, it doesn't really matter what it is, as long as you sort of use that same level of dedication into something else. You'll find that it's not as bad, because you've just seen it as another outlet.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I love how you were able to use that as an opportunity to pursue other things like playing guitar. And I think it's great to have that in mind, not just in relation to just the personal side, but again, I always try to tie everything back to sport, because a lot of the athletes I've worked with are so competitive that they need that direct tie and direct correlation in order to want to pursue something. And I found in general, the more skills you learn, even if it's something that seems completely unrelated to your sport, such as a musical instrument, the more equipped you are to handle the problems that sport throws at you. Ultimately, sport requires you to solve a problem, whether that's how do I get 200 something kilos above my head in order to compete in a weightlifting sport, or maybe the demand is, hey, maybe the problem is, hey, how do I get around this defender in order to score? Whatever it is, you need to creatively solve problems, and those problems that are being thrown at you are constantly evolving and endless. So the more skills you have and the smarter you make your own way of thinking, the better you're going to be in relation to your sport. So I think that regardless of what it is you're doing, the more you learn, the better off you're going to be. And I think that in general, that line of thinking is always present in today's day and age around sport, like we mentioned before.
For sure. I think it's key for athletes to understand that, like, to be able to be an athlete at the highest level, you have a switch that's just different from everybody else, because it's not normal to be able to do that. It's an obsessive perfectionist quality of wanting to get better at something and do it repetitively over and over and over again to be the best at it. And that's such a unique thing that not many people have in them. So use it to your advantage. Use it however you can, in how many different ways that you can, whether it's to be better at the sport, to be successful at business, to learn a different language, to do whatever it is you want to do, because not everyone has that same drive. And I think just athletes are so unique in that way.
Absolutely. Nina, I feel like we could probably talk all day long. You're certainly a wealth of knowledge and insight, and it's amazing to hear more about what you've been through from the Olympic weightlifting side, from the strength and conditioning side, and just as a person living throughout the world that way. Is there any kind of closing thoughts or remarks you have, or anything we missed as we were chatting still?
Yeah, I guess I just leave it with, if you enjoy what you do, keep doing it. If you get injured doing what you do, either enjoy the process getting back to it, because it's like achieving the small things, like learning to walk again, learning to run again. Those are things that weirdly not many people get to experience. And there is an element of fun in that. I've come from a weightlifting background with a busted knee to learning how to walk again, to learning how to lift again. And now I'm developing running mechanic programs for my athletes so that they can learn how to run again. And I've found passion in the intricacies of running, which I never thought I would have. So use it to your advantage, try to find the positives in it, and try to find the joy, because there's a reason you do it. So there must be some joy behind it, and use that to your advantage.
Absolutely. No, I think that's great insights, Nina. For people who want to find out more about you and keep up to date with all the amazing work you're doing, where can they find you online?
Yeah, so the best thing in terms of sport work and career stuff that I'm getting onto, LinkedIn is probably where I post most of my sport stuff. I'm a bit of a nerd in that way. So be at Nina Forte on LinkedIn. And then Same with Instagram. I do a lot of stuff there and help out loads with different little projects, and that's all promoted on social media. So that's Nina_Forte.
Awesome. We'll link to all that in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click there and see everything Nina is up to. Nina, this was amazing. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. I appreciate you.
No, thank you for having me. I'm glad I got to talk a little bit more about what's been happening in the sport world.